Let's dig further into Russia's war on Ukraine and the tactics it is using. Bob Ray is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. He's in New York. Hi, Ambassador Ray. Good to have you back on the program, as always. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Vashti. Thank you.
You as well. Ambassador, I just interviewed the deputy mayor, just came off an interview with the deputy mayor of Mariupol, who was describing, in just the most awful detail, how his city has been completely leveled. And how many civilians in particular have been affected and killed and are going without food, mothers calling, wondering how they can even put food on the table for their children. Should anyone be surprised that Russia is not following the so-called rules of war?
No, it's a brutal regime. I think we're experiencing that, seeing how awful it is. And I don't think anybody should be shocked. It's what they did in Grozny many years ago against the Chechens, and that's exactly what they're doing here. It's just awful.
What are the implications of that conclusion as far as the potential for, and I'm using kind of air quotes here, negotiations go? I know there seems to be, like today there were talks that there were a few readouts that seemed to say, oh, it's a bit more hopeful than it was last week, but at the same time, I don't know, how can we place any hope in it? I'm just wondering, what is your read on the potential for negotiations?
Well, to put it mildly, the Russians have a credibility problem. We know they're lying because their lips are moving. I mean, there's nothing they've told us that has turned out to be the case. They won't even admit to having attacked Ukraine. This is not an extraterrestrial event. This is the Russian government, the Russian army, led by President Putin, who are committing these atrocities. And it's apparent to everyone else that this is what's happening. I think if and when they negotiate, they'll negotiate because they have to, not because they want to or not because they're shamed into it. They'll negotiate because they realize they have no choice. And that's why it's so important, in my view, for every other country possible to do whatever they can to support the Ukrainian people in their struggle.
What does, when they have no other choice, look like?
Well, the country's going bankrupt. The pressures from the financially are huge. Their military effort has been very expensive in terms of human life. They've lost a lot of soldiers, and they have suffered tremendously as a result of this. And I think that the global picture is that their reputation is gone forever. I mean, they're finished as a nation that people look at seriously as any kind of potentially constructive partner in the world. It is a terrible, terrible regime who are doing awful things, and I think that's now become apparent to everybody who can watch a television screen or read a newspaper.
Except maybe, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, the leader of China. There are reports about, the possibility of, or the offer of military equipment, and then also the threat of the potential of China sort of backfilling some of the devastation that the economic sanctions have had, sort of, going around the back to be able to blunt some of that impact. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that will have tremendous implications for China, for their reputation with a whole bunch of countries. And we need to understand, I think, the seriousness of this situation, but also the seriousness of it for China itself. It will lead to a potential broadening of the conflict in ways that nobody wants to see. But there's no getting around the fact that if China were to do this, they would immediately become implicated in this struggle as loyal partners of Russia, which would have very serious implications for them.
Are you worried that there is a possibility that happens, that they actually get involved?
I don't know how you can look at the situation and not be worried. I think the point is to be constructive about, well, what can we do? I think we have to remain incredibly focused, incredibly united, and just full of resolve in terms of what we need to be able to continue to work away at on the sanctions, on the support for Ukraine, dealing with the humanitarian crisis, and dealing with the issue of accountability. And China needs to be aware that it will be implicated in all of those situations.
Do you think that they would ever perceive that, though, as a bit of and not, I don't mean specifically from you, but from the West, for example, as a bit of an empty threat? Because they've done some bad things before, for example, things we've talked about on this program, their treatment of the Uyghurs. The Olympics were still held there. Their treatment, their hostage taking of 2 Canadians, and relations did not cut off between our two countries. I know there's a whole host of other reasons for that. It's not just an isolated thing that you can separate, but at the same time, like, this would be supporting the committing of war crimes. It's a big deal. Do you think that perhaps, even though the West is united, the threat is a bit empty for where China is concerned?
Well, it shouldn't be seen as an empty threat, because I don't think it is empty. I mean, ask the people of Russia whether it's empty. The only thing that's empty is their food stalls and their kitchens and their ability to function as an economy. Their ruble is empty. Their economy is rapidly bottoming out. I think it's not empty as far as Russia is concerned. I don't think there's any point in making threats of any kind to anybody. I think what's more important is not what we say, it's what we do. What we say is important because that's how we help to inspire each other and move forward, but we shouldn't confuse that with what we do. And I think it's the dialogue of deeds that's going to matter more than the dialogue of words. When Russia talks about the fact they're negotiating, nothing that they're doing indicates that they're negotiating. Everything they're doing indicates the opposite. So we need to understand that.
Before I let you go on the subject of what we say, President Zelensky is set to address the House of Commons tomorrow. What do you expect from that?
Oh, I think words of great inspiration. I think he'll be challenging Canada. He has every other parliament he's spoken to. Obviously, he represents a country that wants us to do more. We should anticipate that. Nobody should be offended by it. He's every right to say that. And I think it's going to be, but I do think he's become one of the truly inspiring figures of our time. And I think that'll become very clear to everybody when we hear what he has to say. And just as Churchill did in 1940, he is the lion and he is the roar, and he's going to have a huge impact on our country, on every country that hears him out.
Okay, Ambassador Ray, I'll leave it there. Thank you as always for your time.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you, Vashi.
You too. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.